Hello! Today we'll be looking at what's in this exciting box from Eachine, but just before we get into that, a quick reminder to please like or dislike this video if you didn't like it, comment down below, don't forget to subscribe, and if you can find that little bell icon, click on it, it might tell you when I'm uploading stuff. So yes, fairly obvious from the box, and of course if you looked at the thumbnail you know what this is. The only problem is I haven't worked out how to say it. Eachine, I've got Cvatar, I don't know. I don't normally see the C and V together in a word. I don't know what to call it, so I'm just going to call it the Cvatar and hope I'm vaguely doing it right. Anyway, this is Eachine's answer to all the 3-inch Cinewhoops, which are all the rage these days. And from this, we don't mean like a regular whoop. We mean a bigger whoop capable of carrying a GoPro and really only having it in a whoop sort of enclosure to protect people. You might remember I reviewed not so long ago the iFlight Green Hornet. I'm still working on videos from this because I had motor overheating problems, and I'm still talking to iFlight about it. They're apparently sending me some new motors. We'll see when we get there, that's still to come. So that is one of the things. Will the motors be okay? That's the first thing to think about. There is a 4S and a 6S version of this one. I've got the 4S, so let's crack open the box and see what's inside. Inside looks like this. Got some instructions. Then we've got the main frame and motors. Props aren't installed. This is the plug and fly version, so I've got this little lead out the back ready to connect onto something. But the rest looks fairly tidy. Good sort of quite dense foam here. It's a Runcam Nano 2 on the front. Not a bad camera. Not fantastic, but yeah, not bad. And so it's got an F7 flight controller, which is pretty exciting. That should be cool. Elsewhere in the box, we have some props. These are Gemfan flash. It says ducted 75mm, basically. Not sure what the pitch is. I'll have a look at that later. We've got some parts. You've basically got a little mount for a GoPro, the sort of traditional GoPro mounts that you would sort of put a little screw through and put a mount. So one assumes that it can carry a GoPro plus some sort of mount for it, which is, you know, fairly heavy. We get a spare duct just in case we manage to break it. This is, I think it's TP. It's not super flexible. It's not a TPU. It feels like a sort of thin PLA or something. Prop nuts. VTX antenna and a little right-angled USB connector. USB is way inside there. I'm not sure which way to get in, that way or that way. It looks quite hard to get to. That's going to be interesting. Finally, got a couple of battery straps. Right, so yeah, the first thing I need to do is install a receiver here. That shouldn't be much hassle. We just connect it up. It seems to have a little bit of, feels like TPU that I can squash the little receiver into there. And I can obviously put the antennas up here, although I don't think I'll cap them off because I like a bit more antenna showing. And then we'll get up and Betaflight and see what there is to do. Let's do that now. Okay, let's go into Betaflight, and I'm here having just plugged in my receiver to bind it, and that's because when I plugged in the USB to put power in the receiver, it's something I don't want to plug a cable in and out. It feels really delicate, so just watch out if you get that. So I just want to see what's here. The accelerometer looks nicely calibrated, all good there. Ports wise, we've got loads. It always weirds me out though when it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. What happened to 5? Anyway, we've obviously got the USB connection. UART1 is set to serial RX. UART3 is talking IRC tramp to the VTX. And that's it. So we've got a couple of, or 3 in fact, UARTs left for do things if you want to put some other stuff on. Config wise, regular props in, D-Shot 600, I'll be adding motor stop as per normal. An 8K 4K loop, bit different, especially for an F7, but there you go. CPU load is ticking along at 1%, you'll notice. You can tell the difference now with an F7 to an F4 board. We'll be updating the craft name from, as I can't say, Cvatar, whatever you're supposed to say. Yep, so that's already set for S-Bus, that's good. And where's the beeper? There's the beeper. We'll better have D-Shot beacon on because there's no physical beeper in this one. Power and battery, that's pretty normal stuff. Pit tuning, anything happened here? Looks like there's some bits and pieces happened in here, interestingly. And on the rates, absolute default. I'm always in two minds about these ones, whether I might set up a couple of rates because I can put in a very gentle one to help me fly it gently, and I can put my regular one and then just, you know, not move the sticks as much. We'll come to that later. Receiver, as I said, I've just plugged it in. My aux is on 12. Interestingly, that was already set up. I didn't put it there. And the channel map looks right. I just have to go back and do a couple of sub trims by the looks of it. Modes, we've got It's all on aux1, you understand. Motors, yeah, not much going on there, obviously. And let's have a look at the OSD. It's not bad. It needs a couple of things sorted out for me. I'm guessing from here it's an NTSC version of the camera, because there's this little sort of gap here, and if I set that to NTSC it would do that. Auto, it just doesn't know what's going on at the moment. And this is running 4.2, so in the VTX that's set up correctly. And the power levels, it said it can go up to 800, so that is sorted there. Yeah, then it has got data flash on for black box. Okay, well I'll get that set up for my liking, and then we can come back and actually try and fly this thing. So here's my Cvatar all set up, and you see I've got the GoPro mount on there at the moment. But just a few little notes before we fly it. First off, the receiver is just in that little special hole for it, which works quite well. I did want to take the tops off these tubes to have the antenna going a bit taller, but these seem to be glued on. So right now the antenna only comes to about here. I prefer it to here, but we'll see how that goes with that. I can always remove those and do something out. The other thing to note is, in terms of mounting the camera, it also comes with this little thing, which screws on these holes, just like this one does. And you can obviously put a GoPro on and strap round, or a different camera that way. The other thing to mention is Eachine talk about plugging this into the DJI Air unit, and there's a port in the flight controller to do that. And there's also a couple of bits to go here to replace what is essentially the VTX bit, which looks like this. It's a bit built up, so presumably you can fit the air unit underneath. And this goes hand in hand with this thing to hold the dual antennas, which will also sort of go on there like that in some way. But I haven't got one of those, so I'll be flying it like this, which, yeah, we're ready to do now. Let's go out and give it a fly. Well, here we are at the field. Got the Cvatar, got the GoPro 7, and what I did was charge it, take it out of the frame, and now I've got no way of actually attaching it to the frame. So I have to use my GoPro 4, which I'm filming with at the moment, which of course hasn't got Hyper Smooth on, which is something you generally use on this, so we'll have to just judge it on how it flies and not what the footage looks like. That's really annoying. What an idiot I am sometimes. This will then look like this, which is, you know, it's got a GoPro, but it's not exactly what I meant to do. But you know, we'll see how it goes and stuff. In the meantime, I haven't actually tried hovering this yet, so I should do a quick line of sight, and then we'll get it up, see how it does FPV. And this is the part I realised that if I haven't got the mount for my camera, then I haven't got the head mount, and it gets hard to film it. Anyway, just one thing to mention, I'm using a 1300 battery to start with, see how the motors go. I've got a 1500 and 1800 to try, but I thought we'd go easy, lightweight, check the motors after the line of sight and see how we go there. As you might have expected, it's really, really loud, but it seems to work. So here's my first FPV flight, and as per normal, what I like to do is go out and try on the sort of default or minimal settings. So you can see in the corner there, we're on race band 1 on 25 milliwatts. And first off, I wanted to see how the camera felt and how the signal felt. And quite surprisingly, I had to say from the get-go that this felt really smooth. And I had to go back and check that I actually had my normal rates on, and I'm on a super rate of 0.8, and all my normal sort of, you know, you can flip it around and stuff. But yeah, previously on these ones, I found them a little bit wobbly, and certainly if you looked at that line of sight flight, you could see that it's a little bit wobbly because of the shape of it. But actually flying it is really good. And I'm comparing this directly to the iFlight Green Hornet, because that thing felt like I was flying a brick, and it really did feel a bit choppy. This thing is really feeling a lot better in comparison. So I didn't want to show the HD footage from the GoPro 4 until I showed a little bit more of what it looks like on 25 milliwatts and how it felt in the DVR. And yeah, it surprisingly feels quite light, reasonably agile. You saw there me doing a bit of a dive just to make sure that feels okay. And that is all good. I'm flying this one on a 1300 milliamp hour battery, which seems like the weight's about right, and you can see they're just doing a few flips and it's also good. But let's get on to the second flight, because this is when I up the power and I'll show you how it looks with the HD footage as well. So here's battery number 2, and you can see that the core was quite high here. That's a combination of me going and changing the VTX and also checking that the rate was right. It was sat on the floor for a little while and so it heated up, but I was pretty confident that just flying it would cool it down, and it did pretty quickly. So this is my GoPro 4 Silver. We're up to 200 milliwatts of power, which it seems pretty good. But I wanted to show this because I honestly don't think these particular types of quad works without some sort of stabilization. GoPro 4, good camera, like the footage from it, but you can see it's just a bit wobbly, and that's kind of the nature of this craft. It is a little bit wobbly because it's got these massive ducts and it's got all that sort of foam built around it, and so it does bobble about as you go. So you really do need something that is going to give you some stabilization. For me, I've got a GoPro 7, so Hyper Smooth works very well. For the guys with GoPro 6s, you've got things like Real Steady, and for the GoPro 8, obviously you've got Hyper Smooth 2 and things like that. I don't think I've got this angle of the camera quite right. It's a little bit pointed too downwards, needs to go upwards a bit. But again, it's feeling pretty smooth. It looks slightly smoother in the DVR footage than the GoPro because it doesn't tend to pick up those little bobbles as much as the HD footage does. Really liking the footage we're getting from the FPV camera. Now, I did say the Runcam Nano 2 is not particularly special. There's much better cameras out there, and that's very true. But looking back at the iFlight Green Hornet game, which had the Caddx EOS 2, it's light years ahead of that one. It really is. It's still a little bit reddish in some places, but the overall picture we're getting from this and the VTX is much, much better. Now, at this point, I decided I was going to call it quits, and that's a combination of a couple of things. Firstly, I just didn't think I was going to get the footage that I wanted to really review this properly, because I just don't think, as I said, you can use a camera without stabilization. Secondly, there was sort of traffic going in the further field from the builders, which was a pain, and I thought, that's going to be annoying. So what I did, went on home, came back another day with the right mounting stuff, and I tried flying in a few places just to see what could be done. Well, do things get any more exotic than this? Yes, I take you to under some electricity pylons, which is jolly exciting, isn't it? The idea here was not to say, look, isn't it wonderful flying under some electricity pylons? Isn't this the most beautiful sight ever? It's more of the fact that we're quite limited in space here, and I wanted to make sure that I was perfectly happy controlling it through this sort of environment whilst trying to get vaguely smooth footage. And now I've got the GoPro 7 black on and it's got Hyper Smooth. You'll see that it looks a lot better. Obviously, it's still actually bobbling about a little bit because that's the nature of the quad, but the Hyper Smooth takes it out and you get what looks nice, smooth footage. I quite enjoyed flying down here actually, because I get to fly nice and low. I want to sort of stick the camera in the plants almost just to try that out. I'm keeping the little DVR footage down on the side there because I want you to see what the picture from the VTX is like at the same point, because in all my flying I thought it handled really quite well. There was no particular issues. I got a decent amount of range out of it, and the same with the receiver, although I added that, but that's just an XM Plus. Couple of notes about how I'm filming here. As I said, it's a GoPro 7 Black Edition, and I'm filming in 1080p 60 with Super Live and Hyper Smooth on. Everything else is default, and the DVR recording is obviously just coming from my Dominator 3 goggles. But yeah, it all flew quite nicely. The camera looks pretty good, handled the light well. I'm using a 1550 battery here. Now, every time I flew this, I checked out the motors and I used a range of batteries because I wanted to see how it was. So I got a decent amount of flight time in with this battery. We landed at about 3 minutes 50, and the motors pretty warm. I wouldn't call them quite hot, certainly not scorching, but I think that's something to look out for. I think the best battery you can probably use is the lightest you can go, and with that it's a high C decent 1300. I tried it on several 1300s. One was sort of a high C Tattoo V
free, and that was good. When I tried it on something less good as that, basically it didn't last as long, so that's something to be wary of. Anyway, let's jump to the next location. So here we are in what I would describe as my other tree spot. It doesn't get used as much because it's further away to walk. Again, we're not looking for anything particularly sort of cinematic here or interesting. It was just the fact that I wanted to see again how it worked in tight environments, and what the footage came out like. On this flight I'm using the 1300 battery, and we get a good 3 minutes out of that. And yeah, I'm just enjoying flying this one. It is surprisingly nice to fly. And normally I'm like, these are very sort of, they handle badly. In my experience of the iFlight Green Hornet, it didn't fly very nicely. This, I mean, make no mistake about it, it doesn't feel like you're flying a regular 3-inch or 5-inch quad, but it handles really quite nice. You know, you can push it around and it just performs as you would expect it to. One of the reasons I sort of took it around here is I thought, oh, I can bash into a couple of branches and it won't matter. I barely touched a thing. I don't think I caught anything, because I guess with the sun and stuff it's a lot easier to see, so I really didn't hit anything. Once again, the VTX stands up pretty well. We can sort of go around the trees. I mean, they're quite sparse, to be fair. We're not in any sort of hassle, and there's not a huge amount of leaves, but we can sort of go a bit further in, and our picture looks good. Not a problem at all. And so the stuff we get out of it is fairly good. I'm just trying to put the hammer down a little bit just to try and generate some speed here, but you can see the throttle's only at sort of 40%, and coming low we get a nice impression of speed, at least from the GoPro. I think you could do some nice stuff with that. Anyway, let us move on to the last location, which you will find familiar because it's back to the original field, because I wanted to do a proper range test and see how it worked out. Now on this flight I'm using an 1800 battery, and I would say that the 1800 is pushing it too much. We got about 4 minutes 20 before I landed. I still had a little bit more battery, but I did notice the motors were hotter, and that could be the fact that we're carrying more weight, or it could be the fact that we're just flying for longer. Again, they were not too hot to touch, but I wouldn't want to fly batteries in a row. The sort of nature of this type of quad is it puts those little motors under a lot more pressure than they'd be used to. So I don't know if you can get something that will always come down cool. I would always double check what's happening. If you've got hot motors, you know, don't push it. Use lightweight stuff if you can. So here we are on my range test. We're pushing out to about 550 meters, and there is a point here on the turn where the VTX struggles, and that's because that antenna has a bit of an issue where it is, but it was only for a sort of split second, but it just went completely. I was like, whoa, what just happened then? But it's back to normal, and I can do the normal sort of little swish under the deserted barn or whatever this thing is. Next time I'll know to just poke the camera up a little bit more, I think, because it's not quite what I want it to be. But that's the thing, these quads will take a little while of figuring out exactly where you need to poke your camera for the best position, and exactly what sort of settings you might need for your camera to get the sort of footage that you do want. But again, not particularly exciting footage by any means, because we're just looking at a field. But I kind of like the fact that it looks nice and smooth. We sort of push it into a corner, it goes nicely. If you had to do a situation where you had to sort of dive down or invert, this quad seems to handle it nicely. Yeah, it all did really well. I'm pretty happy. And didn't show any landings, so this I think was the very worst of them. I haven't got my landing mat out, I'm just trying to go light, so it's just a case of disarming and plopping down and then turning over.
Well, colour me pleasantly surprised. This has turned out to be really good. Much better than the iFlight Green Hornet, and iFlight have done some great things. Eachine normally get things kind of right and then cock something up at the end of it, but they seem to have like fluked it and got something good today. Yeah. Works really well. The battery stuff I was talking about, just to demonstrate, is if I take this 1300 tattoo, 2 minutes at best, and you get a lot of life sag. If I take this other 1300 R-line version free, that's when we get a decent 3 minutes, we don't get the voltage sag. You could also use the sort of standard large battery like the 1550, that's good for about 4 minutes and it doesn't seem to overheat. Where I was overdoing it was with an R-line 1800. It seemed that weight versus power didn't play off. I think the 1500 is about the limit, and after that it starts getting a little bit too heavy to get any benefits from upping the battery, and of course you get slightly more motor heat there. But yeah, I've only had 2 so far, but this is by far my favourite Cinewhoop of the 2. Yeah, it just works really well. And if you've got the DJI HD system, you've got literally a plug where you can plug in the air unit, you've got something to put it in there, and you've got the antenna stuff, and you can obviously replace the camera with the right one, so that's pretty cool as well. Oops, continuity, the SD card filled up. All I was going to say is, yeah, nice flight control in this one. That F7 seems to really make a difference. It was pretty smooth all round. One thing I still want to make a note about these sort of quads are, don't get one on the basis that like, oh, you can fly into stuff and it bounces off, it'd be a great beginner quad. Because it's not. It flies very differently, and it's so loud. So please only reserve it for the times that you want to get a specific shot and you're worried about it in terms of safety, hitting people, or, you know, perhaps bouncing off stuff. That's what it's for. Other than that, you know, it flies okay, but it's not the same as flying like a proper 3-inch or 5-inch race drone. It's completely different. So this is still a very specific use case, and really you don't want to fly this for fun because it's so loud. It's the most conspicuous quad in the world. But that said, this is a good one of them, I think. Anyway, this has been the Eachine Cvatar, maybe, who knows what it's called, kindly supplied by Banggood, so many thanks to them. And of course you can find links down below where you can find more details about this. Hope that review's been helpful, and I'll catch you next video. Bye for now.
Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.